I've seen things in my time as a Marine that would make most folks question their sanity, but nothing quite compares to the stories I've collected about ghost tanks. Now, I know what you're thinking. Another war vet spinning tall tales. But hear me out. These aren't just my stories. They're accounts from soldiers and civilians alike, spanning decades and continents. And they all share one thing: the inexplicable appearance of tanks that shouldn't be there. My fascination with these phantoms of war machinery started with my grandfather. He served in the Korean War, manning a modified Sherman tank. I remember sitting on his knee as a boy, listening to him describe the bone-chilling cold of the chosen reservoir and the way the tank's metal conducted that frigid air right into their bones. But it wasn't his war stories that planted the seed of my obsession. It was something he said offhandedly one night after one too many whiskeys. "Sometimes, son, I swear I can still hear those tracks rolling, even when I'm miles from any road." At the time, I brushed it off as the ramblings of an old soldier. But years later, after my own tours of duty, I started hearing similar stories. Whispers in the barracks, accounts shared over late-night watches. It wasn't until I left the corps that I decided to dig deeper, to collect these tales, and try to make sense of them. One of the first accounts I came across was from a civilian named Mr. Callahan. It happened back in 1976 on the Isle of Portland in the UK. Callahan was driving home one foggy night when he found himself suddenly surrounded by a scene from the past. World War I-era soldiers milled about, prepping vehicles and equipment. It was like he'd driven straight into a D-Day preparation site. Callahan described the scene with a clarity that sent chills down my spine. The soldiers' uniforms, the rumble of tank engines, even the smell of cigarette smoke and motor oil hanging in the air. He said he sat there, frozen in disbelief, for what felt like hours but was probably only a minute or two. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the entire scene vanished. The road ahead was empty, the fog lifting to reveal nothing but the quiet night. Now you might be thinking Callahan had dozed off at the wheel, or maybe he'd had one too many pints at the local pub. But here's the kicker: he wasn't the only one. Over the years, dozens of people reported similar experiences in that area, all describing the same scene, down to the smallest details. Details that matched historical records of D-Day preparations in that very location. But it's not just Portland. Reports of spectral World War II tanks have been cropping up along a stretch of road in Hertfordshire, England, for decades. Drivers describe a ghostly tank appearing out of nowhere, crossing the road before vanishing into thin air. Some hear the rumble of tracks and the squeak of metal but see nothing. Others catch a glimpse of a tank turret in their rearview mirror, only for it to disappear when they turn to look. As a former Marine, my first instinct was to approach these stories with skepticism. We're trained to trust our senses, to rely on what we can see, hear, and touch. The idea of phantom tanks goes against everything I learned in the Corps. And yet, the sheer volume of reports, the consistency in the details, it's unsettling. I've spent countless hours poring over historical records, trying to match these sightings with known military movements or training exercises. Sometimes there's a logical explanation: an old vehicle being transported under cover of night, or a film shoot using period-accurate props. But more often than not, I come up empty-handed. The tanks these people describe simply shouldn't be there. It's a conflict that keeps me up at night. On one hand, my military training screams that there must be a rational explanation. On the other, I can't ignore the sincerity in the voices of those who've experienced these phenomena. The fear, the awe, the certainty. It's not something you can fake. As I delve deeper into these accounts, I find myself torn between two worlds. The tangible, explainable world I knew as a Marine, and this shadowy realm where the laws of physics seem to bend. It's a journey that's taken me across continents and through time, collecting stories that challenge everything I thought I knew about reality. And let me tell you, the rabbit hole only gets deeper from here. Because these ghost tanks, they're just the beginning. There are accounts of entire phantom battles, of soldiers encountering their long-dead comrades, of weapons that couldn't possibly exist. It's a side of military history they don't teach you in basic training, a shadow world that exists alongside our own. So buckle up, folks, because the story I'm about to tell you, it's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about war, about history, and about the very nature of reality itself. Welcome to the world of ghost tanks, where the past never truly dies, and the echoes of war reverberate through time itself. After diving into the ghost tank phenomena in Western Europe, my research led me to a chilling tale from the other side of the former Iron Curtain. This story centers around a man named Victor, a self-proclaimed black archaeologist who made a living excavating World War I battle sites in Russia. Now, I've seen my fair share of battlefield relics, but what Victor and his team encountered goes beyond anything I've ever experienced. Victor's story begins like many others in his line of work, with the promise of uncovering history and maybe making a few rubles on the side. He and his team had been tipped off about a previously undisturbed area where a fierce tank battle had supposedly taken place during the war. The site was remote, deep in the Russian countryside, far from prying eyes and nosy authorities. As they began their dig, the team's excitement was palpable. They unearthed shell casings, fragments of uniforms, and even a few personal effects. Dog tags, a tarnished cigarette case, things that connected them to the men who had fought and died there decades ago. But it wasn't long before things took a turn for the strange. It was Nikolai, one of Victor's team members, who first noticed something was off. He claimed to hear distant voices speaking German, despite the fact that they were miles from the nearest town, and no one in their group spoke the language. At first, the others brushed it off as the wind playing tricks, or maybe Nikolai had been hitting the vodka a bit too hard. But then others started to hear it too. Snatches of conversation, barked orders, all in German. Victor told me that he tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a film crew nearby, or some kind of historical reenactment. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the case. They were too far off the beaten path, and the voices seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then came the sounds that chilled them to their core, the unmistakable rumble of tank treads. Now I've been around my fair share of armored vehicles, and let me tell you, there's no mistaking that sound. It's not just the noise of the engine or the tracks. It's the way you can feel it in your chest, the vibration that goes right through you. Victor and his team felt that vibration, heard those tracks. But there wasn't a tank in sight. The sounds seemed to be coming from an area they hadn't excavated yet, a stretch of overgrown field that looked like it hadn't been disturbed in years. As they cautiously approached the area, the sounds grew louder, more distinct. They could hear the creak of metal, the clank of equipment, even the shouts of phantom soldiers. What happened next, according to Victor, defies explanation. As they crested a small rise, the entire landscape before them seemed to shimmer and change. Suddenly, they were no longer looking at an overgrown field, but a raging World War I battle scene. Tanks, both German and Soviet, rolled across the landscape, exchanging fire. Soldiers ran between them, their uniforms crisp and new, their weapons blazing. Victor and his team stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. It was like watching a movie projected onto the air itself, except this was in 3 dimensions, with sound and even smell. The acrid scent of gunpowder and burning fuel filled their nostrils. The scene played out before them for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. They watched as tanks were hit, erupting into flames. They saw soldiers fall, heard their cries of pain and fear. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the vision vanished. The field was once again empty and overgrown, with no sign of the battle they had just witnessed. Panic set in. Victor and his team fled the site, leaving behind their equipment in their haste to get away. They piled into their truck and drove for hours, not stopping until they were back in familiar territory. It wasn't until later, when they had calmed down enough to talk about what happened, that they realized they had all seen the same thing. In the days and weeks that followed, Victor tried to make sense of what had happened. He researched the area, trying to find records of the battle they had witnessed. To his surprise, he found nothing. No major engagements had been recorded in that specific location during the war. This experience shook Victor to his core. He gave up black archaeology after that, unable to shake the feeling that he had stumbled upon something beyond his understanding. When I interviewed him years later, I could still see the fear in his eyes as he recounted the story. Now, I've heard a lot of ghost stories in my time, but this one stuck with me. The level of detail, the shared experience of multiple witnesses, the sheer scale of what they claim to have seen, it's hard to dismiss. And it raises so many questions. Was this some kind of mass hallucination, a time slip, or something else entirely? As a former Marine, I'm trained to look for logical explanations, but the more I delve into these stories, the more I find myself questioning what I thought I knew about reality. These phantom battles, these echoes of the past, they challenge our understanding of time and space in ways that are both fascinating and terrifying. Victor's story is just one of many I've collected from the Eastern Front. There are tales of phantom T-34s appearing in the snow-covered forests of Finland, of ghostly German tigers prowling the ruins of Stalingrad. Each story adds another piece to this puzzling phenomenon, suggesting that the echoes of war can linger long after the guns have fallen silent. As I continue my investigation into these ghostly encounters, I can't help but wonder what other secrets lie buried in the battlefields of the past. And more importantly, what do these phantom tanks and spectral battles tell us about the nature of war, memory, and the very fabric of reality itself? The deeper I dig, the more I realize that the lines between past and present, between the physical and the supernatural, are far more blurred than I ever imagined. As my investigation into the phenomenon of ghost tanks deepened, I found myself venturing into territories far beyond the familiar landscapes of Europe and Russia. The trail led me to the scorching deserts of North Africa, where I stumbled upon a tale that would make even the most hardened skeptic question their beliefs. It was during my research that I came across the account of Thomas Blackwood, an author who had dedicated years to chronicling unexplained military phenomena. Blackwood's most intriguing story centered around an Australian soldier's encounter with what came to be known as the Black Ghost Tank in Libya during World War I. The soldier, whose name has been lost to time, was part of a unit tasked with reconnaissance in the vast expanse of the Libyan desert. It was a harsh, unforgiving environment where the shimmering heat could play tricks on the mind and mirages were a common occurrence. But what this soldier witnessed was far more than a simple mirage. According to Blackwood's account, the Australian soldier was on a routine patrol when he spotted something on the horizon. At first, he thought it was just another Allied tank, perhaps separated from its unit. But as it drew closer, he realized something was off. The tank was like nothing he'd ever seen before, sleek, angular, and painted in a black so dark it seemed to absorb the desert sun. The soldier radioed his findings back to base, but before he could get a response, the mysterious tank opened fire. What happened next defied all logic and known laws of warfare. The soldiers' unit returned fire with everything they had: anti-tank rifles, artillery, even called in air support. But nothing seemed to touch this phantom tank. Shells that should have torn through its armor simply dissipated on impact, leaving not so much as a scratch. For hours, this ghostly battle raged across the dunes. The black tank moved with impossible speed and agility, outmaneuvering vehicles decades more advanced. It left no tracks in the sand, appeared and disappeared at will, and seemed to possess firepower far beyond anything known to exist at the time. As a former Marine, I've seen my share of advanced military hardware. But even in the 21st century, nothing comes close to what this World War I-era soldier described. The technology, the capabilities, it was like something out of a science fiction novel, not a historical account. The encounter ended as mysteriously as it began. As suddenly as it had appeared, the black tank vanished into thin air, leaving behind a group of shell-shocked soldiers and a landscape scarred by a battle that, by all rights, shouldn't have been possible. In the aftermath, theories abounded. Some speculated it was an experimental German weapon, years ahead of its time. Others suggested it might have been a hallucination brought on by the extreme desert conditions. But the physical evidence, the expended ammunition, the battle damage to the Allied vehicles, told a different story. Something had been out there in the desert that day, something that didn't play by the rules of our reality. As fascinating as the Black Ghost tank story was, it wasn't an isolated incident. My research led me to numerous accounts of similar encounters across various theaters of war. But it was a more recent story, one that hit close to home, that really drove home the reality of these phenomena for me. It happened at Camp Lejeune, a place I knew well from my time in the Corps. A young Marine, fresh out of basic and still wet behind the ears, was on guard duty one foggy night. The kind of night where the mist seems to swallow everything beyond arm's reach, turning the familiar into something alien and threatening. This Marine, let's call him Jones, was at his post when he heard it. The unmistakable rumble of tank treads, growing louder by the second. Now, Camp Lejeune is home to the 2nd Tank Battalion, so the sound of armored vehicles isn't unusual. But something about this was different. The sound was off, older, rougher, like the tanks my grandfather used to describe from his days in Korea. As Jones peered into the fog, he saw them. 3 tanks, rolling down the road towards him. But these weren't the modern Abrams he was used to seeing. These were relics, Vietnam-era M48 patents, museum pieces that hadn't seen active service in decades. Jones watched, transfixed, as the Phantom tanks rolled past his position. He described the chipped paint, the worn treads, even caught a glimpse of the crews. Young men in outdated uniforms, their faces set in grim determination, as if heading into battle. The tanks passed by Jones's post and continued down the road, vanishing into a dense stand of trees. Jones, shaken but still in control, immediately reported the incident. A search was launched, but no trace of the tanks was found. No tracks in the soft ground, no broken branches in the woods where they'd disappeared. It was as if they'd never been there at all. When I heard this story, it sent chills down my spine. I knew that stretch of road, had walked it countless times during my own time at Lejeune. The idea that these ghostly apparitions could appear in a place so familiar, so grounded in the present day, was deeply unsettling. But it also got me thinking about the nature of these encounters. Were these truly ghosts in the traditional sense, or was something else at play? The more stories I collected, the more I began to consider an even more mind-bending possibility. That what we were dealing with weren't ghosts at all, but some kind of temporal anomaly. The concept of time slips or dimensional crossings isn't new in paranormal circles, but applying it to these military encounters opened up a whole new realm of possibilities. Could it be that, under certain conditions, the barriers between different periods of time become thin enough for these machines of war to slip through? It would explain the wide range of encounters. From World War I battles replaying themselves in empty fields to Vietnam-era tanks rolling through modern military bases. It might even account for the futuristic Black Ghost tank in Libya, a visitor not from the past, but from some potential future. As I pieced together these accounts, a pattern began to emerge. Many of the sightings occurred in areas with a long history of conflict, as if the accumulated weight of human struggle had somehow worn thin the fabric of reality in these places. Others seemed tied to specific dates or atmospheric conditions, suggesting some cosmic alignment that facilitated these crossovers. The implications of this theory are staggering. If these encounters are indeed glimpses of other times bleeding into our own, what does that say about the nature of time itself? Our past, present, and future happening simultaneously, separated only by a veil that occasionally parts. And if so, what other wonders, or horrors, might be waiting on the other side? As a Marine, I was trained to deal with tangible threats, enemies I could see, touch, and fight. But these phantom tanks, these echoes of wars past and future, represent a challenge of a different order. They force us to confront the possibility that reality is far more complex, far more mysterious than we ever imagined. And yet, as unsettling as these encounters can be, there's also something oddly comforting about them. They serve as a reminder that the sacrifices of those who came before us are not forgotten, that the echoes of their courage and determination continue to resonate through time. In a way, these ghost tanks are a testament to the enduring spirit of all who have served, a spectral honor guard ensuring that their memory lives on. As I continue to gather these stories, to piece together this puzzle of phantom armor and spectral battles, I'm left with more questions than answers. But one thing is certain: the world is a far stranger, far more wondrous place than I ever realized during my time in uniform. And I, for one, am determined to uncover the truth behind these tanks that roll across time and space, leaving tracks not in the mud, but in the very fabric of reality itself. As I delve deeper into these spectral encounters, I find myself constantly drawn back to my own family history, particularly my grandfather's experiences during the Korean War. His stories, once mere background noise to my childhood, now take on new significance in light of the phantom tank phenomena I've been investigating. I remember him speaking of the bone-chilling cold at the Chosin Reservoir, a cold so intense it seemed to seep into your very soul. He'd describe how the metal of their Sherman tank would become so frigid it could tear the skin off your hands if you touched it bare. In those conditions, he said, the line between reality and hallucination became frighteningly thin. There were times, he confessed in his later years, when he wasn't sure if what he was seeing was real or a product of his frozen, exhausted mind. He spoke of ghostly Chinese soldiers appearing out of the swirling snow, of hearing the rumble of enemy tanks that weren't there when the mist cleared. At the time, I dismissed these tales as the exaggerations of an old soldier, or perhaps the result of trauma and extreme conditions. Now, I'm not so sure. The more I research these ghostly encounters, the more I'm struck by how often they occur in environments of extreme stress or sensory deprivation. The fog-shrouded roads of England, the shimmering heat of the Libyan desert, the snow-blinded wastes of Korea, all places where the mind might be more susceptible to what? Hallucination, or perhaps more open to perceiving things that exist just beyond our normal range of awareness. This line of thinking led me to expand my research beyond just tank sightings. I began looking into other forms of spectral military encounters, ghost soldiers, phantom battlefields, even reports of entire military units seemingly unstuck in time. What I found was staggering in its scope and consistency. From the trenches of World War I to the jungles of Vietnam, from ancient battlefields to modern military bases, these phenomena have been reported across centuries and continents. Civil War soldiers appearing on modern highways, Roman legions marching through English suburbs, future wars glimpsed in the desert sands. The sheer variety of these encounters is mind-boggling. But it's not just the global scope that's striking. It's the similarities in the details. Time and again, witnesses describe a sense of displacement, as if they've stepped into a bubble where the normal rules of reality don't apply. They speak of sounds that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere, of figures that are at once solid and insubstantial, of battles that rage with furious intensity and then vanish without a trace. As I compile these accounts, patterns begin to emerge. Many sightings occur on or near significant dates, anniversaries of battles, for instance, or during military exercises that mirror historical events. Others seem tied to specific locations, places where the weight of history presses heavily on the present. This has led me to a theory, one that I'm still grappling with myself. What if these sightings aren't just random occurrences or mere ghost stories? What if they're evidence of something far more profound, a fundamental interconnectedness of all time and space, particularly in relation to human conflict? The idea is both thrilling and terrifying. If true, it suggests that every battle ever fought, every life lost in conflict, leaves an indelible mark on the fabric of reality. These phantom tanks, these ghostly soldiers, might not be echoes or recordings, but actual moments in time bleeding through to our present. But this theory raises as many questions as it answers. If these are indeed glimpses of other times, why do they appear when and where they do? Is there some cosmic mechanism at work, some grand design we're only just beginning to perceive? Or is it more personal than that? Do these visions appear to those who, for whatever reason, are most receptive to them? I think back to my grandfather, to the young Marine at Camp Lejeune, to Victor and his team in the Russian countryside. What connected them, beyond their military background? Was it a state of mind, a certain openness to the impossible? Or was it something in their very nature, some innate ability to perceive these cracks in reality? As a former Marine, I was trained to deal in certainties, intangible threats, and concrete objectives. This journey into the world of spectral tanks and phantom battles has forced me to confront a reality far more fluid and mysterious than anything I encountered in my military career. It's humbling, to say the least, to realize how little we truly understand about the nature of our reality. And yet, there's something oddly comforting in these encounters, unsettling as they may be. They serve as a reminder that the sacrifices made by soldiers throughout history are not forgotten, that the echoes of their courage and determination continue to resonate through time. In a way, these ghost tanks and spectral soldiers are a kind of eternal honor guard, ensuring that the memory of those who served lives on. As I continue to gather these stories, to piece together this puzzle of phantom armor and spectral battles, I'm left with more questions than answers. But one thing is certain: the world is a far stranger, far more wondrous place than I ever realized during my time in uniform. These encounters challenge our understanding of reality, of time and space, and of the very nature of human experience. For those who've witnessed these phenomena firsthand, the impact is profound and lasting. Many speak of a newfound appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things, a sense that the boundaries between past, present, and future are far more permeable than we've been led to believe. Others find comfort in the idea that those who've gone before us are not truly gone, that their spirits, or at least the energy of their experiences, continue to influence our world in tangible ways. As for me, this journey has fundamentally altered my perception of reality and my place within it. The rigid by-the-book Marine I once was has been replaced by someone far more open to the mysteries of the universe. I've learned to approach these stories not with skepticism, but with a sense of wonder and respect for the experiences of those who've lived them. In the end, perhaps that's the true value of these ghostly encounters. Beyond the questions they raise about the nature of reality, they serve as a powerful reminder of our shared human experience. Across time and space, through the fog of war, and the mists of history, we remain connected to each other, to those who came before us, and to those yet to come. As I close this chapter of my investigation, I'm acutely aware that I've only scratched the surface of this phenomenon. The world of ghost tanks and spectral battles is vast and complex, with new stories emerging all the time. But I'm committed to continuing this journey, to shining a light on these hidden corners of human experience. For in these tales of phantom tanks rolling across the boundaries of time, of battles long past replaying themselves in empty fields, we find not just ghost stories, but profound truths about the nature of memory, of history, and of our place in the grand tapestry of existence. And who knows, perhaps in unraveling these mysteries, we might just come to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the incredible interconnected universe we inhabit.